Pick up a handful of desert sand. It feels timeless, ancient, the product of wind and rock grinding against each other for millions of years. Except, what if some of it isn't? What if the glassy, melted silica you're holding isn't the product of time, but the signature of a single, terrifying moment? A moment of heat so intense it defies all natural explanation, a temperature hotter than the surface of the sun. For thousands of years, we've told ourselves a story about two cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, turned to ash by a divine hand. We assumed it was an allegory, a myth. But what if it was a report? Because the Sumerians, the world's first writers, kept records not of gods but of the sky falling. This isn't just about validating an old story. It's about uncovering a planetary scar we never knew existed. And if you're using this video to fall asleep, perfect. That's exactly what it's for. So maybe hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you are and what time it is. I genuinely love checking those. It's wild seeing London at sunrise, New York at lunch, Los Angeles at midnight, all watching at the same time. Tonight, we are going on a journey deep into the past to a time when the world was younger and the sky was a far more dangerous place. We are going to peel back the layers of myth and scripture to find the hard, scientific truth buried beneath. First, we will revisit the story you think you know, the biblical account of Sodom and Gomorrah, but we will read it not as priests, but as forensic investigators looking for clues. Then we will travel to the sun-scorched plains of the Dead Sea, to an archaeological dig that has uncovered evidence of a cataclysm so violent it seems impossible. Finally, we will look to the heavens, guided by the world's oldest astronomers, the Sumerians, who etched a warning onto a clay tablet nearly 5,000 years ago, a warning of a mountain of fire in the sky. What you're about to hear is a chain of evidence that connects a mysterious explosion in the European Alps, a cryptic star chart from ancient Mesopotamia, and the complete annihilation of a thriving Bronze Age civilization. This is the story of a very bad day in human history. The account in the book of Genesis is one of the most famous and terrifying stories ever told. Two cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, described as a paradise, a garden, are condemned for their wickedness. Two angels visit the righteous man Lot and urge him to flee with his family, telling him not to stop and not to look back. Then the text says, "The Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone, and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities, and all the plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground." Lot's wife, disobeying the command, looks back and is turned into a pillar of salt. For centuries, this has been interpreted as a metaphor for divine wrath. But what if we strip away the divine interpretation and read it as a raw eyewitness account? What do we see? We see an event that is not of this earth. The destruction comes from the sky. It is described as fire and brimstone, which is a literal translation of burning sulphur. The devastation is absolute, incinerating not just people and buildings, but the very soil itself. And the aftermath involves a strange prevalence of salt. These are not the hallmarks of an earthquake or a volcano or a conventional war. These are specific, peculiar details that have puzzled historians for millennia. For a long time, the prevailing theory was that if these cities existed at all, they were destroyed by an earthquake. The Jordan Rift Valley, where the story is set, is a seismically active area. An earthquake could have toppled buildings and perhaps released pockets of subterranean methane gas and bitumen, which could then ignite. It sounds plausible, but it doesn't fit the evidence of the text. An earthquake does not rain fire from the sky. It doesn't melt metal and pottery. It doesn't instantly incinerate everything that grows. and it certainly doesn't explain the pillar of salt. The story describes an event that is fundamentally aerial in nature. The destruction came from above. So, where do we look for these lost cities? The Bible describes them as the cities of the plain, located near the Dead Sea. For decades, archaeologists searched, primarily south of the Dead Sea, with little success. They found Bronze Age settlements, yes, but no evidence of this unique, fiery destruction. It seemed the story was destined to remain a myth, a moral tale. But here's where the story takes a sharp turn into the realm of the tangible, the real. A different group of archaeologists, led by Dr. Stephen Collins, decided to challenge the conventional wisdom. They looked at the geographical clues in the text from a different perspective and began excavating a massive mound, a tell, north of the Dead Sea in modern-day Jordan. The site is called Tall El Hammam, and what they found there is nothing short of mind-blowing. Picture a thriving city, a metropolis of the Middle Bronze Age, around 3,600 years ago. It was one of the largest cities in the region, perhaps 10 times larger than contemporary Jerusalem. It was protected by massive mud brick walls, several meters thick. It was the center of a flourishing civilization, a hub of trade and power. For hundreds of years, it had dominated the landscape, and then, in an instant, it vanished. As the team at Tall El Hammam dug down, they passed through the layers of Roman and Iron Age occupation. But then they hit something else, a dark, chaotic layer of charcoal and ash about 1.5 meters thick. They called it the destruction layer. And within this layer, the evidence was not just of a fire. It was of something else entirely, something with a power that is difficult to comprehend. They found pottery fragments whose outer surfaces had been melted into glass. The technical term for this is vitrification. To melt pottery into glass requires a temperature of at least 2,000 degrees Celsius, or about 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit. For context, a house fire burns at around 1,100 degrees Celsius. A volcanic eruption's lava flows are typically between 700 and 1,200 degrees Celsius. No normal fire, no volcano, no Bronze Age technology could generate this kind of heat. But it gets stranger. The intense heat seems to have lasted for only a very short time. A flash. They know this because while the outer layer of the pottery was vitrified, the inside was often untouched. This points to a sudden, incredibly intense blast of thermal radiation. They also found mud brick walls, the foundations of palaces and homes that had been vaporized. Not knocked over, but obliterated. The tops of the remaining walls all show evidence of being destroyed by a powerful, directional shockwave that originated from above. Human remains were found in this destruction layer, and they tell a terrifying story. Skeletons were not whole. They were fragmented, torn apart, mixed in with the ash and debris. This suggests an event of extreme and sudden violence, a blast wave so powerful it did more than just kill, it disintegrated. One of the most compelling and chilling discoveries was what scientists call shocked quartz. These are grains of sand that have been fractured in a unique, parallel pattern. This pattern is not found in nature. It is only formed under immense, instantaneous pressure. Shocked quartz is considered a definitive fingerprint. It is the calling card of a cosmic impact event. It is found at every known asteroid impact crater on Earth, from the Chicxulub crater that wiped out the dinosaurs to Meteor Crater in Arizona. And it was found in the destruction layer of Tall El Hammam. The evidence points overwhelmingly to a single, horrifying conclusion. This city was not destroyed by an earthquake or a war. It was destroyed by a cosmic airburst. An asteroid or a comet entered the Earth's atmosphere at an immense speed, tens of thousands of miles per hour. It didn't strike the ground to create a crater. Instead, it detonated in the air a few miles above the city. Think of it as a natural, celestial bomb. The resulting explosion would have been more powerful than the largest nuclear weapon ever detonated. First would come the light, a flash brighter than 1,000 suns, instantly blinding anyone who saw it. Immediately following would be a pulse of thermal radiation, a wave of pure heat moving at the speed of light. This is what vitrified the pottery and vaporized the mud bricks. This is what would have incinerated any living thing in a matter of seconds. Then, lagging just behind, would come the shockwave, an invisible wall of compressed air moving faster than the speed of sound, levelling everything in its path, tearing buildings and bodies apart. And what about the brimstone and the salt? The area around the Dead Sea is rich in sulfur deposits. An explosion of this magnitude would have ignited them, creating the rain of burning sulfur described in the ancient text. The Dead Sea itself is, of course, incredibly salty. The force of the airburst would have vaporized tons of this hypersaline water, blasting it into the atmosphere and across the plain. This salty brine would have rained back down, coating everything. Anyone caught in this fallout, like Lot's wife in the story, could have been encased in a crust of salt crystals. More than that, this salt blast would have poisoned the land. The archaeological record shows that after this destruction event, the entire region, an area of about 500 square kilometres, was abandoned. For the next 600 to 700 years, nobody lived there. The soil was too salty to grow crops. The once fertile plain, the garden described in Genesis, became a barren wasteland. The story wasn't just an allegory, it was a memory of an environmental catastrophe. So we have a story that describes an aerial blast of fire and brimstone, and we have an archaeological site that shows definitive evidence of a cosmic airburst. The parallels are staggering, undeniable. The destruction of Tall el-Hammam provides a chillingly plausible scientific explanation for the biblical tale of Sodom and Gomorrah. But this raises an even bigger question. What was it that exploded over the Dead Sea all those years ago? Can we identify the killer? To answer that, we must leave the dusty plains of Jordan and travel back further in time and further north, to Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. Here, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the Sumerian people invented writing, the wheel, and astronomy. They were meticulous observers of the night sky. They charted the movements of the stars and planets, believing they held sway over human destiny. And in the dusty archives of the British Museum lies a single, unassuming clay tablet that may hold the key. Its collection number is K8538. It is known as the planisphere. It's not the original tablet, but a later Assyrian copy made around 700 BC of a much older Sumerian original. For over a century after its discovery, scholars struggled to understand it. It was clearly a star chart divided into 8 sectors, with drawings of constellations and cuneiform text, but it didn't seem to match any known configuration of the night sky. Many dismissed it as astrological nonsense, but 2 British researchers, Alan Bond and Mark Hempsel, took a different approach. They were not archaeologists or linguists, they were rocket scientists and engineers. They hypothesized that the tablet wasn't a general map of the sky, but a detailed moment-by-moment observation of a specific event. Using powerful computer software that could replicate the night sky from any point in history, they began the painstaking process of trying to match the tablet's observations to a real celestial event. What they discovered is the heart of this entire mystery. The tablet, they claim, is a precise record kept by a Sumerian astronomer of the night of June 29th in the year 3123 BC. It tracks the final hours of an object moving through the sky. The Sumerian astronomer noted its position relative to the known constellations, its brightness and its trajectory. It wasn't a star, it wasn't a planet. It was an Aten-class asteroid, over 1 kilometre in diameter, on a direct collision course with Earth. The level of detail on the tablets is astonishing. The Sumerians didn't have telescopes, but they were brilliant naked-eye observers. The tablet describes the object's path so accurately that Bond and Hempsel were able to calculate its orbit, its size, and most importantly, its impact location. The tablet is, in effect, the world's oldest record of an impending asteroid impact. An eyewitness account of the planet's doom, etched in clay. According to their calculations, the asteroid's trajectory was low, coming in from the northwest at a very shallow angle. This is crucial. A steep impact creates a deep circular crater. A shallow impact creates a very different kind of event. The asteroid would have clipped the Earth's atmosphere like a stone skipping across a pond, shedding energy and debris as it went. And here is the linchpin that connects everything. Bond and Hempsel's calculations pointed to a primary impact zone, not in the Middle East, but in Europe, specifically in the Austrian Alps, at a place called Kufels. For years, geologists have been puzzled by the geology of Kufels. There's a massive 5-kilometre wide valley that looks like it was caused by a giant landslide. But the evidence doesn't quite fit. The rock shows signs of having been subjected to immense heat and pressure, conditions not normally associated with a landslide. The theory is that the main body of the asteroid, or a significant part of it, exploded in the atmosphere directly above Kufels. The explosion, estimated to be equivalent to more than 1,000 megatons of TNT, would have vaporized the asteroid and triggered the catastrophic landslide that scarred the valley. It would have been an event of unimaginable scale, wiping out everything for hundreds of miles. But the story doesn't end in the Alps. Remember the trajectory? The asteroid was coming in at a shallow angle, moving from northwest to southeast. The explosion over Kufels was just the beginning. The superheated plume of debris, gas, and smaller fragments from the disintegrating asteroid would have continued along this ballistic trajectory. It would have crossed the Mediterranean and descended back towards the surface over the Levant. Now, imagine you are a goat herder on the plains of the Dead Sea on that day. You see what looks like a new star in the sky, growing brighter and brighter over several hours. Then a column of fire appears on the northern horizon, moving towards you at impossible speed. This is the incandescent plume from the Kufels event, a river of fire in the sky. As it gets closer, it descends, and then, directly over your head, it detonates in a final blinding airburst. This is the event that destroyed Tall El Hammam. This is the event that became the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. The Sumerian tablet K8538 isn't just a record of the asteroid. The researchers believe the second half of the tablet describes the aftermath. It talks about a pillar of smoke and fire rising, of devastation on a continental scale. The Sumerians weren't just observing an astronomical event, they were recording a cataclysm that unfolded across their world. The dates are a point of contention. The Sumerian tablet points to an event in 3123 BC. The destruction of Tall El Hammam is dated by archaeologists to around 1650 BC. That's a discrepancy of nearly 1,500 years. So how can they be the same event? This is the puzzle that scientists are still working to solve. Some suggest the archaeological dating could be wrong, or that the carbon dating has been contaminated by the unusual nature of the event itself. Others propose that the Kufal's impact and the Sodom airburst were two separate events, perhaps caused by different fragments from the same parent body, part of a larger meteor stream that threatened the Earth for centuries. The Taurid meteor stream is a well-known phenomenon. It's a wide river of dust and debris left behind by a giant comet that broke apart tens of thousands of years ago. Earth passes through this stream twice a year. Most of the debris is tiny, creating beautiful meteor showers, but hidden within the stream are larger objects, some of them kilometers across. The theory of coherent catastrophism suggests that during certain periods, Earth's orbit intersects with denser clumps of this debris, leading to an increased risk of impacts. It is possible that the early and middle Bronze Age was one such period of bombardment. The event of 3123 BC, recorded by the Sumerians, might have been one major impact, and the Tall El Hammam event, 1,500 years later, could have been another. This would mean our ancestors lived under skies that were not empty and peaceful, but actively hostile. It could explain the sudden collapse of several civilizations around this time, collapses that have long puzzled historians. The end of the Old Kingdom in Egypt, the collapse of the Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia, the fall of early Bronze Age cultures across the Near East. Historians usually blame climate change or warfare, but a series of cosmic impacts provides a much more dramatic and comprehensive explanation. What if the stories of gods battling in the heavens, of sky fire and world-ending floods, are not just myths? What if they are the fragmented, terrified memories of a time when the sky was literally falling? We have the Sumerian record, we have the biblical account, we have the ground truth from archaeology, we have the geological scar in the Alps. Each piece of evidence on its own is intriguing but debatable. But when you put them all together, a terrifyingly coherent picture begins to form. It's the picture of a civilization at its peak, confident and prosperous, suddenly and completely erased from existence by a force from beyond their world. It's a reminder of the profound fragility of our existence on this planet. We build our cities and our empires under the assumption of a stable, predictable cosmos. But the history written in the earth and in our oldest texts tells a different story. It tells us that we live in a cosmic shooting gallery and that sometimes the universe pulls the trigger. The implications are staggering. It means that one of the foundational stories of Western civilization is not a myth, but a reasonably accurate, if poetically rendered, account of a specific type of cosmic impact. It suggests that our ancestors were better observers, and their myths were more rooted in reality than we have ever given them credit for. They didn't have the language of physics and astronomy to describe what was happening, so they used the language they had, the language of gods, wrath, and divine judgment. But the observation at the core of the story was real. Fire rained from the sky. The cities of the plain were overthrown. The very earth was scorched and salted. This changes how we must view the ancient world. We see them as primitive, bound by superstition. But they were survivors. They witnessed events we can barely imagine, and they did their best to record them, to pass down the warning to future generations. They carved it on stone. They pressed it into clay. They wove it into their sacred stories. And for thousands of years, we failed to listen. We dismissed their warnings as fantasy. but the science is now catching up to the myth. The work at Tall El Hammam, the decoding of the planisphere tablet, the analysis of the Kufal's landslide, all of this is pointing in the same direction. It's forcing us to re-evaluate the line we draw between history and myth. It's forcing us to accept that the forces that shaped human civilization were not just terrestrial, they were also celestial. Think about what this means for our own time. We track near-Earth asteroids. We have programs designed to detect potential threats. But are we truly prepared? The Tunguska event in 1908 flattened over 2,000 square kilometers of Siberian forest. That was a relatively small object, probably only 50 meters across. The Chelyabinsk meteor in 2013 injured over 1,500 people with a shockwave from its atmospheric explosion. The object that destroyed Tall El Hammam was vastly larger. The object recorded by the Sumerians was larger still, a true civilization killer. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah is not just a tale from the distant past, it is a cautionary tale for the future. It is a 5,000-year-old warning, etched in clay and backed by the hard data of geology and archaeology. It tells us that the sky is not always a friend. It tells us that everything we have built can be undone in a single, blinding flash. We are only just beginning to piece this incredible story together. There are still debates, still unanswered questions, still discrepancies in the timeline. But the evidence trail is undeniable. From the Alpine valleys of Austria to the museum archives in London to the excavation trenches in Jordan, the clues all point to a forgotten chapter in human history, a time of fire from the sky. The next time you look at the desert, don't just see sand, see the aftermath. See the evidence of a power that can turn cities to glass and soil to poison. The next time you read an ancient myth, don't just see a story. Listen for the echo of a real event, the memory of a real catastrophe passed down by the survivors. Because the scorched earth of 3000 BC is more than just a historical curiosity. It is a permanent reminder that we are a fragile species, living on a fragile planet, in a universe that is far more violent and unpredictable than we like to believe. The past is never truly dead. It's not even past. It is a map and a warning. And we are finally learning how to read it. Let's look closer at that fire. When we read the words fire and brimstone, our minds conjure a medieval image of hellfire. But what if this is a precise, literal description? Brimstone is an old name for sulfur. The Jordan Valley, and the area around the Dead Sea in particular, is geologically rich with it. A shockwave and heat pulse of this magnitude would have instantly vaporized and ignited these surface sulfur deposits, creating a rain of burning sulfur dioxide. But the chemistry of the event goes deeper and far stranger. Researchers analysing the destruction layer at Tall El Hammam found something else mixed in with the melted pottery and shocked quartz. They found tiny, spherical particles of molten iron and sand, a material they call spherules. These microscopic droplets could only have formed in an extremely high temperature, high pressure environment before raining down on the city. They also found nanodiamonds, microscopic crystals of pure carbon that require mind-bending pressures to form, pressures far beyond anything achievable by terrestrial geology or human technology at the time. Think about that for a second. Diamonds raining from the sky, not as gems, but as the microscopic signature of an almost unimaginable violence. These materials are fingerprints, pointing directly to the composition of the object that detonated overhead. It suggests a carbonaceous chondrite, a type of asteroid rich in organic compounds, metals, and carbon. When this object exploded, it didn't just release energy, it injected its own elemental signature into the atmosphere, seeding the destruction with the materials not native to the Earth's surface. Now, let's return to the ground, to the moment of impact. The evidence for the directionality of the blast is one of the most haunting details uncovered at the site. Archaeologists can read the ruins of a city like a forensic team reads a crime scene. In Tall El Hammam, the evidence is skewed. The northeastern sides of the remaining mud brick walls are heavily abraded, sand-blasted by a force of incredible power, while the southwestern sides are relatively protected. The destruction wasn't random like in an earthquake. It had a clear line of travel, and the human remains tell the same story. The few skeletons that were found were not neatly buried. They were located on the southwest sides of walls, as if they had been running for cover and were then slammed against the structures by an invisible force. The bones themselves show signs of what's called extreme disarticulation and fragmentation. This isn't the work of a fire or a collapsing building. This is the signature of a supersonic blast wave, a pressure front moving so fast that it literally tears a human body apart. The energy required to do this is difficult to overstate. Physicists have calculated that to account for the evidence on the ground, the melted pottery, the vaporized brick, the shocked quartz, the sheer destructive force, the air burst over the Dead Sea plain must have yielded an explosion equivalent to at least 15 megatons of TNT. That's 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. All of that energy was released in a fraction of a second, a few kilometers above a thriving metropolis. Have you ever seen footage of old nuclear tests? You see the mock houses, the vehicles, placed miles from ground zero. You see the flash, and then a moment later, the shockwave arrives, and everything is scoured from the face of the earth. Now imagine that, but on a scale that dwarfs our most powerful weapons. Imagine a city of thousands of people going about their day. In one instant, the world turns white. In the next, it is incinerated. And in the next, it is gone. This event didn't just destroy one city. The Bible speaks of the cities of the plain, plural. For a long time, this was seen as a literary flourish, but recent archaeological surveys have changed that view entirely. The team investigating Tall El Hammam expanded their search, surveying dozens of other known Bronze Age settlements in a 25-kilometre radius. What they found was astonishing. At least 16 other towns and over 100 smaller villages in the area show evidence of being wiped out and abandoned at the exact same moment in history. The entire civilization of the Jordan Valley Disk, a region that had been continuously inhabited for thousands of years, was extinguished in an afternoon. This was not the destruction of a city, it was the obliteration of a kingdom, a regional apocalypse. And then came the silence. The 700-year period of abandonment is, in many ways, just as significant as the destruction itself. History and nature abhor a vacuum. When a city is destroyed by war or earthquake, it is almost always rebuilt, often immediately, by the survivors or their neighbours. The location is usually strategic, with access to water and trade routes. But not here. The entire region, once described as a garden, became a cursed land. Nobody returned. The salt is the primary reason. We mentioned the Dead Sea being blasted across the landscape. Scientific analysis of the soil from that period confirms it. The concentration of salts, particularly those from the Dead Sea, spiked to levels that would make agriculture completely impossible. It wasn't just a dusting. The land was fundamentally altered, poisoned on a chemical level. It would have taken centuries of natural rainfall to slowly wash the soil clean, to dilute the poison enough for anything to grow again. But there's likely more to it than just salt. The impactor itself, the cometary fragment, would have been rich in other elements. An impact of this scale can release heavy metals and other toxins that were locked inside the asteroid's core. Think of it as a dirty bomb from space. Furthermore, the immense energy of the blast would have cooked the atmosphere, creating what is known as acid rain. The nitrogen in the air would have been converted into nitric acid, raining down and further poisoning the water and the land. So what you have is a multi-pronged environmental catastrophe, a scorched earth policy delivered from the heavens. The survivors, if there were any in the immediate vicinity, would have faced a world that was unrecognizable and utterly hostile to life. Their fields were poison, their water was poison, the air itself was poison. Their only choice was to flee. And can you imagine the stories they told? They wouldn't have spoken of asteroids and shockwaves. They would have spoken of the fury of a god, of a paradise lost because of the wickedness of its people. This story isn't just an explanation, it's a justification. It provides a reason for the unreasonable. It imposes a moral order on an event of pure chaotic physics. It's a way for the human mind to process the unthinkable. The trauma of this event would have been so profound that it echoed down through the generations, passed from parent to child for over 1,000 years, before it was finally written down in the text that would become the Hebrew Bible. This deep cultural trauma is a key piece of the puzzle. It explains the story's incredible staying power. It wasn't just another flood myth or morality tale. It was anchored to a real place, a visible scar on the landscape that people could point to. For centuries after the event, the Dead Sea Plain would have been a glistening white wasteland. Anyone travelling through the area would have seen the proof. They would have seen the land that God himself had cursed. Let's reconsider the story of Lot's wife. We see it as a strange, almost fairy tale-like punishment, but viewed through the lens of this event, it becomes something far more visceral. Why was the command not to look back? Perhaps it was a simple survival instruction. Looking back at a 15-megaton airburst, even from a safe distance, would mean looking directly at a flash brighter than the sun. It would cause instantaneous and permanent blindness. And what of her transformation into a pillar of salt? The story describes a rain of fire and brimstone, followed by a fallout of salt. If she lingered, looking back, she would have been caught in the initial phases of this chemical fallout. The blast would have superheated the hypersaline water of the Dead Sea, creating a hot, aerosolized brine. As this cloud cooled and rained down, it would have coated everything it touched. A human body, caught in such a shower, would be simultaneously boiled and encased in a thick crust of salt crystals. The description of a pillar of salt might be one of the most terrifyingly literal pieces of eyewitness testimony in all of ancient literature. This theory, which connects a biblical story to a cosmic event, forces us to look at other ancient myths with new eyes. For generations, we have separated our histories into two neat piles, the factual and the mythological. But what if that dividing line is an illusion? What if myths are simply history recorded without the benefit of a scientific vocabulary? Consider the Greek myth of Phaethon, the son of the sun god Helios. In the story, Phaethon tries to drive his father's sun chariot across the sky, but loses control. He veers too close to the earth, scorching it, boiling rivers, and turning vast regions to desert. To save the world, Zeus is forced to strike the chariot from the sky with a thunderbolt. Is this just a simple story about hubris? Or is it a memory distorted through the lens of Greek theology, of a comet or asteroid streaking across the sky, breaking up and causing widespread devastation. The parallels are uncanny. Look to the Hindu Vedas, which describe cosmic battles between gods using weapons of incredible power. The Brahmastra is described as a weapon that creates an incandescent column of smoke and fire as bright as 10,000 suns. Its use results in the boiling of waters, the death of all life in the area, and a land that becomes barren for years. For a long time, modern interpreters saw this as poetic hyperbole. But how different is that description, really, from the calculated effects of a multi-megaton airburst? This isn't to say that every myth is a direct record of an impact, but it suggests that the collective memory of humanity may be haunted by the ghosts of cosmic encounters. The Bronze Age, in particular, seems to have been a time of great upheaval, not just in the Levant, but worldwide. Civilizations in Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, and China all experienced mysterious collapses or dark ages for which historians have struggled to find a single unifying cause. They blame climate change, invasion, political instability, but the theory of coherent catastrophism, championed by astronomers like Victor Kluge, provides a powerful and unsettling alternative. The theory posits that our solar system is not the clockwork, predictable place we imagine it to be. It is a much dustier, more chaotic environment. Our sun is periodically surrounded by the debris of giant, disintegrating comets. When the Earth's orbit passes through these dense streams of debris, the rate of impacts, from dust-sized particles to city-killing asteroids, can increase by orders of magnitude. It's not a single bullet, but a sustained volley of celestial shrapnel. Kluge and his colleagues argue that the Bronze Age was one such period. For centuries, humanity may have lived under a sky that was far more active and threatening than our own. Meteor showers would have been spectacular, even terrifying, and occasionally one of the larger pieces in that stream would make it through the atmosphere. This would create a pattern of sporadic, unpredictable, and seemingly divine destruction. One decade, a city in the Middle East is wiped out. 50 years later, a tsunami scours the coast of the Indian Ocean, caused by an unseen ocean impact. A century after that, a dust veil from another impact event high in the atmosphere causes years of global cooling, leading to crop failures and famine from China to Europe. To the people on the ground, these would seem like isolated, unrelated acts of the gods. They would have no way of knowing that the true cause was the same, our planet's slow recurring dance through a river of cosmic debris. This model provides a stunningly elegant explanation for the simultaneous stresses seen on so many ancient cultures. It wasn't just the climate changing. The fundamental rules of the world seemed to be in flux. The sky, the source of light and life, had become a source of terror. And this brings us back to that incredible Sumerian clay tablet, the Planisphere K8538. The work of Alan Bond and Mark Hempsel on this tablet is central to the entire hypothesis. It represents a potential bridge between the mythic and the scientific. If their interpretation is correct, it is the single most important astronomical observation from the ancient world. It is the smoking gun. Let's delve deeper into what they claim to have found. The tablet is not just a simple drawing. It is a disc, a planisphere, designed to be held up to the night sky to identify constellations. The cuneiform notes on the tablet are not just labels, they are observational notes. The Sumerian astronomer wasn't just mapping the sky, he was taking measurements. He noted the times when the object rose and set. He used other stars as reference points to track its movement against the background. This is methodical, empirical science. The key was realizing that the tablet was an observer's log, recording the sky as it changed hour by hour on a single night. Using planetarium software, Bond and Hempsel could wind back the clock to see what the sky looked like from Mesopotamia on any given night for thousands of years. They were looking for a night when an object passed through the specific constellations noted on the tablet, in the right order, at the right times. After years of computation, they found one perfect match: the night of June 29th, 3123 BC. On that night, their model shows an Aten-class asteroid, a type whose orbit crosses Earth's, making its final approach. The notes on the tablet describe it as a white stone bowl, a perfect description of a bright, round object moving through the heavens. The astronomer tracks it for over 8 hours as it grows brighter and moves faster, a terrifying omen in the night sky. The second half of the tablet is what makes it so chilling. The writing style changes, it becomes more frantic, more descriptive. It describes the object's final plunge towards the horizon in the northwest, and then notes a sky glow that persists long after. It describes a pillar of smoke and dust rising in the distance. The Sumerian astronomer didn't just see an asteroid, he witnessed its impact, and the destination he recorded, based on the trajectory, points directly towards the Austrian Alps. The Kofel site is a geological anomaly that has puzzled scientists for over a century. It's a 5-kilometre wide, crater-like structure, but it lacks the typical signs of a ground impact, like a raised rim or an ejector blanket. It looks more like the entire side of a mountain simply collapsed. But the rock at the bottom of this landslide shows evidence of being heated to extreme temperatures and crushed by incredible pressure. Geologists call this frictionite, rock melted by the friction of a landslide. But the volume of frictionite at Kufels is orders of magnitude greater than at any other landslide site on Earth. The airburst theory resolves this paradox beautifully. A kilometre-wide asteroid exploding low in the atmosphere above the mountain would deliver a devastating thermal and pressure wave straight down. It would vaporise the asteroid itself, so there's no meteorite to be found. It would shatter and melt the surface of the mountain, creating the massive volume of frictionite. And the downward blast would trigger the colossal landslide that formed the valley we see today. It fits every piece of geological evidence at the site. The shallow trajectory is the key that links this European cataclysm to the story in the Middle East. Imagine a bullet fired at a very low angle into a lake. It doesn't just stop. It creates a massive plume of water that travels forward, carrying the bullet's energy and momentum with it. The Kufels airburst was like that. The explosion created a superheated incandescent plume of gas and vaporized asteroid fragments that continued moving southeast, following the original trajectory. It was no longer a solid object, but a shotgun blast of plasma, rock, and fire, moving at hypersonic speeds through the upper atmosphere. From the ground in Mesopotamia or the Levant, it would have looked like a comet, a river of fire in the sky, travelling for hundreds of miles. As this plume lost momentum and altitude, it would have descended back into the thicker lower atmosphere. This final descent is what triggered the secondary explosion, the airburst over the Dead Sea Plain. It wasn't a separate asteroid, it was the tail of the dragon that had first struck Europe. This solves one of the great puzzles of the Tall El Hammam site, the lack of a crater. A 15-megaton explosion from a solid object should have left a significant scar on the landscape, but none has been found. An airburst from a dispersing, fragmenting plume, however, would deliver all of its energy to the atmosphere and the surface without a single large object ever hitting the ground. It is the perfect explanation for the evidence we see, but we must address the major objection. the timeline. How can an event recorded by a Sumerian in 3123 BC be responsible for the destruction of a city that archaeologists date to around 1650 BC, a difference of nearly 1500 years? There are several potential solutions to this problem, and the scientific community is actively debating them. The first and most straightforward possibility is that the archaeological dating is flawed. Radiocarbon dating is a powerful tool, but it is not infallible. The dates from Tall el-Hammam come from organic material, like seeds and grain, found in the destruction layer. But an event of this nature, an intensely radioactive thermal flash, could potentially alter the carbon isotopes in that material, skewing the results and making the event seem more recent than it actually was. This is a complex issue, and more testing is needed. The second possibility is that the interpretation of the Sumerian tablet is incorrect. While the astronomical match is compelling, it is a complex piece of decoding. Perhaps the tablet refers to a different event, or is not an astronomical record at all. This is the position of many mainstream archaeologists and cuneiform scholars who remain deeply skeptical. But there is a third, more tantalizing possibility. What if both dates are correct? What if they are not the same event, but two different chapters in the same story? This brings us back to the torrid meteor stream. If the Earth was passing through a particularly dense and dangerous part of this debris field for a prolonged period during the Bronze Age, then multiple significant impacts would not just be possible, but probable. In this scenario, the 3123 BC event recorded by the Sumerians and striking Kofels was a major cataclysm. It would have had global consequences, throwing dust into the atmosphere and causing climate instability for years. It may have been the event that gave birth to the worldwide myths of cosmic battles and falling fire. Then 15 centuries later, as the Earth continued its journey through this dangerous region of space, a smaller fragment from the very same cometary stream entered the atmosphere over the Levant. This fragment, perhaps only 50 or 60 meters across, was responsible for the more localized destruction of the cities of the plain. It was an echo of the larger, earlier event. This multiple impact model is compelling because it aligns the archaeological evidence with the historical and mythological records. It paints a picture of a long period of celestial threat, a true dark age where civilization was periodically punctuated by terrifying and unpredictable destruction from above. This would have profoundly shaped the psychology, religion, and politics of the time. It would have fostered a deep-seated belief in powerful, unpredictable sky gods who held the fate of humanity in their hands. How could you believe otherwise when you could see the evidence with your own eyes? Think of the enduring power of the story. The names Sodom and Gomorrah have become bywords for sin and divine retribution. But maybe their real legacy is something else entirely. Maybe they are humanity's oldest and most ignored warning sign, a message from our distant ancestors about the true nature of the cosmos we inhabit. A message that says, look up. The sky is not as empty as it seems. The science behind this is pushing the boundaries of several different fields: archaeology, astrophysics, geology, and textual analysis. It requires specialists from usually separate worlds to come together and compare their data. The process is slow and often contentious, but the combined weight of the evidence is becoming impossible to ignore. From the microscopic shocked quartz grains in Jordan, to the colossal scar in the Austrian Alps, to the meticulous notes of a long-dead Sumerian astronomer, All the clues are pointing to the same incredible conclusion. We are the descendants of the survivors of a cosmic bombardment. And the story of that survival is written not just in our holy books, but in the very soil beneath our feet. Let's dig into that soil for a moment, because it's one thing to say the land was poisoned with salt. It's another to understand what that truly means on a human scale. This wasn't a bad harvest. This was a chemical sterilization of the entire basis of their civilization. The soil analysis at Tall El Hammam and the surrounding sites reveals an influx of salt so massive it pushed the salinity to levels comparable to the Dead Sea itself. We're talking about concentrations of 4 to 8% in some places. For comparison, most crops cannot tolerate salinity above 1.5%. This salt didn't just go away, it seeped deep into the earth, contaminating the groundwater, poisoning the wells and the streams. It clung to the topsoil, creating a hard, impenetrable crust that would shatter a Bronze Age plough. For the survivors who fled to the hills, looking back at their home, they would have seen their once green and fertile valley transformed into a shimmering white desert, a ghost of a landscape. Every morning, the sun would rise and reflect off this salt pan, a daily blinding reminder of the day the sky fell. This is why nobody came back. It wasn't about fear or superstition, not entirely. It was a practical, biological reality. The land was dead. For an agricultural society, this is the ultimate curse. Their wealth, their power, their entire way of life was rooted in that soil. The cosmic event didn't just kill the people, it killed the future. It took a thriving kingdom and turned its most valuable asset into its most permanent liability. The 700-year abandonment is the long, slow echo of that single violent moment. It is the sound of a civilization's ghost finally giving up. And what about the perpetrator? The torrid meteor stream is more than just a passing shower of shooting stars. It is the sprawling, decaying corpse of a truly colossal comet, a monster that once dwarfed anything in our modern skies. Astronomers believe that around 20,000 to 30,000 years ago, a giant comet, perhaps over 100 kilometers in diameter, was captured by Jupiter's immense gravity and thrown into a short-period orbit within the inner solar system. Picture this celestial titan, a dirty snowball of ice, rock, and organic compounds, larger than a small country. As it repeatedly looped close to the sun, the intense heat began to take its toll. The ice sublimated, the structure fractured, and the comet began to disintegrate. It broke apart into multiple smaller comets and a vast, dense river of debris. We know the remnants of this breakup today. They include Comet Encke, the asteroid Oljato, and the billions of tons of dust and rock that form the torrid stream. Our planet ploughs through this river of debris twice a year, once in late June and again in early November. Most of the time, we pass through the sparser parts of the stream, and the result is the beautiful torrid meteor shower. But the stream is not uniform, it is clumpy. It contains swarms of much larger objects, ranging from the size of a house to the size of a mountain. And sometimes our orbit and the orbit of these swarms intersect. The theory of coherent catastrophism proposes that during the Bronze Age, the Earth was going through just such an intersection. For centuries, our planet was playing a recurring game of Russian roulette, with a swarm of city-killing and civilization-threatening projectiles. This completely reframes our view of the ancient world. It challenges the traditional uniformitarian model of history, which assumes that the geological and cosmic environment has always been as stable as it is today. What if it wasn't? What if our ancestors lived in a world where the sky was an active participant in human affairs? A world where a new, bright star might appear, hang in the sky for a few nights, like a terrible omen, and then unleash unimaginable destruction. This would fundamentally alter the human psyche. It would create a sense of profound existential dread, a feeling that the world was inherently unstable and that humanity was at the mercy of powerful, inscrutable forces. Is it any wonder, then, that this period saw the rise of religions centered on powerful, often wrathful, sky gods? Is it a coincidence that so many cultures developed complex systems of astrology and divination, desperately trying to read the heavens and predict the whims of these gods? They weren't just being superstitious. They were responding rationally to the environment they lived in. They were trying to find a pattern in the chaos. They were looking for a way to survive. This model of a prolonged bombardment also helps explain the mystery of the Kofel-Sodom timeline discrepancy. If the torrid stream was full of large fragments, there is no reason to assume there was only one impact. The 3123 BC event at Kofels could have been the opening act, a truly continent-spanning cataclysm caused by a kilometre-scale object. The 1650 BC event at Tall El Hammam could have been a later, smaller, but still devastating encore caused by a different fragment from the same swarm. This creates a terrifying picture of the Bronze Age. Imagine living through that first event. The skies darken with dust, temperatures plummet in a brief impact winter, and stories filter in from terrified merchants and refugees about entire regions turned to wasteland. Then, for 1500 years, a tense peace. The skies are still active, with spectacular meteor showers, a constant reminder of the threat. And then one day, for your great-great-grandchildren, it happens again. Another town, another city, is wiped from the map in a flash of light. This is no longer a single event. It is a generational trauma. It becomes part of the cultural DNA. The warning to Lot's family, to flee and not look back, becomes more than just part of a story. It becomes a survival manual. A piece of practical, hard-won advice passed down from a time when knowing how to react to a sudden, impossibly bright flash in the sky was a matter of life and death. Let's dissect the physics of that moment with more precision. The 15 megaton yield is a number so large it's almost meaningless. So let's make it real. The first effect of the airburst would be the thermal pulse. This is not fire in the conventional sense. It is a massive wave of electromagnetic radiation, primarily infrared, travelling at the speed of light. It would have arrived instantly. For anyone in the line of sight, the experience would be one of having their entire body flash-cooked from the inside out. The water in their cells would instantly boil. Clothing would combust. The surface of the ground itself would superheat and ignite. This intense, short-lived pulse of heat is the only way to explain the vitrified pottery. A normal fire envelops an object, heating it slowly and evenly, but a thermal pulse delivers all its energy to the side facing the blast. This is why the outer surfaces of the pottery shards at Tall El Hammam are melted to glass, while the interiors remain relatively normal. It is the unmistakable signature of a nuclear-scale thermal flash. Seconds after the light, the shockwave would arrive. And again, we must be precise. This is not just a strong wind. It is a moving wall of air compressed to an incredible density, travelling faster than sound. Scientists measure this force in pounds per square inch, or PSI. A 5 PSI overpressure will shatter a brick house. The shock wave that hit Tall El Hammam is estimated to have been at least 50 psi, and perhaps much higher. At that pressure, reality itself seems to break down. Mud brick walls don't just collapse, they are pulverized into dust and blown away. Wood doesn't splinter, it is reduced to fibers, and the human body simply ceases to exist as a coherent object. The wave of pressure is so immense that it overcomes the tensile strength of flesh and bone. This explains the extreme fragmentation of the human remains found at the site. It is the most brutal and efficient form of destruction imaginable. But the air burst would have created another, even stranger phenomenon. As the superheated fireball rises, it creates a powerful vacuum in its wake, sucking up millions of tons of dust, debris, and vaporized earth from the ground below. This material is then blasted outwards in a lateral ground-hugging hurricane of incandescent particles. This is called a base surge. It's a phenomenon seen in large-scale surface explosions, like volcanic eruptions or nuclear tests. This base surge, a churning, superheated cloud of dust and salt moving at hundreds of miles per hour, would have been the final instrument of destruction. It is what scoured the landscape, sandblasting the remaining walls and carrying the bodies of the dead for hundreds of meters. It is what carried the salt from the Dead Sea and deposited it across the entire valley. The directional evidence found by the archaeologists, the abrasion on the northeastern sides of walls, is a perfect match for a base surge originating from an airburst slightly to the northeast of the city. We are not just guessing at what happened. The ruins themselves are telling us in the language of physics. And within that apocalyptic cloud were the alien signatures of the impactor itself, the iron-rich spherules and the nano-diamonds. Think of the conditions required to create them. An asteroid, a mixture of rock, metal and carbon, slams into the atmosphere at 40,000 miles per hour. The pressure and temperature in front of this object reach levels found only in the core of a star. In this crucible of unimaginable force, the carbon atoms in the asteroid are instantly squeezed into the crystal lattice of diamonds. Iron and silica are vaporized, then condense into tiny liquid droplets. These microscopic tracers then rain down, mixed into the ash and salt, and settled into the destruction layer. They are a message from the cosmos, a calling card from the object that died so spectacularly over their city. When scientists put these tiny grains under a scanning electron microscope, they are looking at the elemental ghost of the killer. Now step back from the science and put yourself in the shoes of a survivor. You were in the hills, tending your flock. You saw the flash, you felt the ground shake. You heard the thunder that went on and on. You hid, terrified, as a hot, salty wind roared through the valley. Hours later, when silence returns, you creep to the edge of the ridge and look down at where your home used to be. There is nothing, just a smoking, flattened ruin, coated in a strange white dust. The very air smells of sulphur and burning. The river is choked with mud. There are no people, no animals, no buildings. The world you knew just an hour ago has been erased. How do you explain this? There are no words in your language for asteroid, shockwave, or thermal radiation. You have only one frame of reference, the divine. This could only be the work of a god, an act of judgment so absolute, so devastating, it defies all other explanation. And the story you tell your children, and they tell their children, will not be about orbital mechanics. It will be about sin and righteousness. It will be about divine wrath. The core details of the event will be preserved. The fire from the sky, the overthrow of the city, the brimstone, the salt, the poisoned land. But the cause will be transformed from physics into metaphysics. This is the birth of a myth, not as a fantasy or a lie, but as a culture's best attempt to process an incomprehensible trauma. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah is what remains after the scientific details have been eroded by 1,000 years of oral tradition. It is the emotional and historical core of the event, wrapped in the only language available to its victims. This process is likely not unique. How many other myths from around the world are fossilized memories of similar events? Think of the story of the Great Flood. Nearly every ancient culture has one. For a long time, historians assumed they were all referring to local river floods. But what if some of them are memories of a different kind of flood? An oceanic impact by a comet or asteroid would trigger a mega tsunami of almost unimaginable scale, a wave hundreds, even thousands of feet high that could wash over entire coastlines and low-lying continents. To the people on the shore, it would not look like a wave. It would look as if the oceans themselves were rising up in a single, world-ending deluge. The story they would tell would be of the heavens opening and the fountains of the deep breaking forth. The epic of Gilgamesh, which predates the biblical account of Noah, describes just such a flood, sent by angry gods to wipe out humanity. It is filled with details of a terrifying storm and world-engulfing waters. Is it possible that this too is a memory, a distorted echo of an impact event from an even more distant past? Look at the traditions of the Native American Hopi people. Their cosmology speaks of a series of worlds, each destroyed by a cataclysm before the survivors emerge into the next. The second world was said to be destroyed by fire, when the sky rained fire and the world was burned to a cinder. They attribute this to the god Sotuknang. Again, we see the same pattern, a memory of fiery destruction from the sky, rationalized as the act of a powerful deity. What we are discovering is that our ancestors may have left us a hidden history of the planet, encoded in their most sacred stories. For centuries, we have been reading them as theology or literature, when we should have been reading them as forensic reports. We have been searching for their meaning in the metaphorical, when it may have been hiding in the literal all along. The implications of this are profound. It means that the human story is inextricably linked to the story of the solar system. We are not separate from the cosmos, living out our lives on a safe and isolated stage. We are embedded within it, and we are subject to its violent whims. The development of civilization, the rise and fall of empires, the very evolution of our religious beliefs may have been shaped by forces we are only now beginning to comprehend. It also means we must extend a new kind of respect to the ancient mind. We have a tendency to view our ancestors as naive and superstitious, their myths as the fanciful tales of a pre-scientific age. But what if this very tendency, this dismissal of ancient wisdom, blinds us to a vast library of planetary memory? Perhaps their myths weren't mere superstition, but meticulously crafted data points, encoded warnings, designed to survive the millennia and speak to a future generation, us. They weren't just telling stories, they were building an archive. This revelation forces us to confront a terrifying and exhilarating truth. Our past is stranger, more violent, and profoundly more interconnected with the cosmos than we ever dared imagine. It means our very existence is a testament to survival against impossible odds, a lineage forged in cosmic fire and flood. So, as we continue to unlock these ancient secrets, consider what else lies hidden, waiting to reshape our understanding of everything. What truths are you willing to re-examine about your own story?